Now, you found, I believe, the insert in your bulletin, and you will need that eventually. And you will, in order to work on the insert, you will need a pen or a pencil. Next Saturday afternoon, two young people, Andrea and Michael, will stand here in front of the communion table and pledge their vows to one another. At the end of the service, words taken from the passage we just read in Colossians will be spoken to them as a charge. And I will say, Andrea and Michael, be kind to one another. Forgive one another as the Lord has forgiven you. And crown all of these things with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Then they will seal the vows they have made by bestowing a kiss on one another. And after a blessing and being introduced as husband and wife, they will go back down the aisle, thus entering a new part of their lives. Hopefully, their lives will then be filled with love, but the love that leads to a deep and enduring relationship in addition to romantic love. Now, let me pause for just a moment and ask, is there anyone here this morning who's been married in the last year? I see two people, but they're being very shy, one in the balcony, a couple in the back. We are delighted to celebrate with you, for you have begun this new life in love, and you are probably already beginning to experience the growing pains that entering into this new commitment produces. Perhaps you have been surprised by the stresses and the joys that marriage has brought you. Now, I believe there are also some couples here who have celebrated 50 years of marriage. Where are you? I see one couple, and I see Reverend Begany. Come on, stand up. 50 years of marriage. That is a true commitment. Okay. Reverend Bates, you can stand up to it. It's at least 4 couples who have gone through a lot of years. A half century or more of living with, forgiving, loving one another. And you too have had many opportunities to experience love and forgiveness, joy and sorrow. You have experienced, I hope, all of those qualities that Paul wrote about. Now, we make all kinds of commitments in addition to the commitments of marriage. Many of you have made commitments to this congregation, and I suspect there are more than a few of you here who've been members for more than 25 years. I'm seeing a couple of you. You're being very shy this morning. Just wave your hand if you've been a member here more than 25 years. There you are up in the balcony, all around. That is a long time to work with a variety of leaders, a number of different members, a number of pastors and associates. You also have experienced the challenge, the joys, perhaps frustrations and accomplishments. But most of all, I hope in your years of being part of this congregation, you have had the sense of God in your midst, of Christ being present not just in your life, but in the life of the community here, and that you have experienced us living out our calling to be a beacon here on Public Square. In these long-standing relationships, whether it is of marriage or friendship, commitment to a community, you have had opportunities to deepen those relationships. And that requires choice on your part, choice to decide whether you will spend the time it takes to become more involved, to become deeper in that relationship, or whether you will just keep things on the surface. Those of you who have experienced those long-term marriages know that you need to take those opportunities to deepen the relationship if it is to be truly marriage and fulfilling marriage that you expected. And so it is that Paul, in his letter, wrote to us, inviting us to deepen our relationship with Christ. In this letter to Colossians, we learn all about the qualities that are necessary for a healthy, deep, long-term relationship. And Paul tells us that these qualities are the same ones that God has exhibited toward us: humility, patience, kindness, bearing with, that is, understanding one another, and most of all, forgiveness. All of these are the qualities that God shows to us through Christ. Now, when I first read this passage, I thought about New Year's resolutions. Okay, I need to be a little more forgiving here. I need to be a little more patient there. But these qualities that Paul lists go beyond resolutions that humans make. These are characteristics of the bonds that speak of long-term relationship, not something that can be skipped or set aside in a day or a week when we get too busy to keep our New Year's resolutions. These qualities are part of healthy relations between parents and children, among siblings, in well-connected neighborhoods and communities, and particularly in strong faith communities. But most of all, these describe the relationship between God and ourselves. Now, when we look at the gospel lesson that is also part of the readings for the morning, we have a record, the only record actually in Scripture, that tells us about Jesus' years between his birth and his public ministry. It shows us also the opportunity that Jesus took to deepen his relationship with God, in an opportunity that presented himself that he seized. Jesus journeys with his parents from their hometown in Nazareth to Jerusalem. Jesus and his parents would have gone with a large group, probably relatives, kinfolk, maybe as many as 50 people. And they would have journeyed quite a distance, several days away on foot. Part of journeying together is that the road up to Jerusalem, and it is literally an ascent, is winding, and it is full of places, hiding places for robbers and bandits. So it was not wise to travel that road alone. We hear about this road again from Jesus in the parable of the Good Samaritan. So Mary and Joseph would have known Jesus was part of that group, probably would not have been overly worried about him. Jesus is probably 12 or so, just becoming a teenager, and parents of teenagers know that teenagers do have a tendency to do their own things. Now, I come from a small family, so at family gatherings, it's very easy to see if someone's missing when there are only 4 or 5 people. But those of you who come from much larger families or can imagine a whole block party or neighborhood gathering, realize that when you get several generations together, it's not easy to keep track of anyone. Small children are running in and out, adults who haven't seen each other for a while get to talking, and perhaps you don't always become aware of where people are, and especially teenagers who do have a tendency to go their own way. So when Jesus' parents left after their sacrifice, after their time at the temple, they gathered with all those who'd come with them, assuming Jesus was with them. And they had journeyed for a day, perhaps 10 or more miles, when they discovered that he really was not a part of the group. And so they made their way back to Jerusalem and searched for him. Scripture tells us they searched for 3 days. And eventually they found him. And when they found him, he was no longer the little boy who had traveled to Jerusalem with him, for he was sitting in the temple questioning and answering the elders. He had become a young adult almost overnight. And Mary and Joseph reacted as human parents would. "Where have you been? Why did you worry us?"